Evening. Jack Carter here. Today, we're doing one of those episodes that, well, it feels like a map of the country being redrawn, slowly, quietly, and then, suddenly. The projection's blunt. White British people could become a minority in the UK by around 2063 if current trends continue. That's a long way off, you might say, but not really. Demography isn't a mood, it's the accumulation of choices, births, migration and policies, year after year. So, let's take a steady look at what's happening, why, and what it might mean for Britain's future. Right, first, set the scene. If you watch the numbers over decades, you see a pattern. The share of people identifying as white British has been falling for some time. Not overnight, but consistently. The Office for National Statistics and a number of independent analysts, including Professor Matt Goodwin, have models that push this trend forward and ask, what happens by mid-century and beyond? Those projections hinge on three big drivers: sustained net migration, differences in birth rates between groups, and the way people move inside Britain. Young people clustering in cities, older populations in rural areas, that sort of thing. Listen, I'm not here to be alarmist. I'm here to be clear. Projections are not prophecy, they're conditional. They say, if X, Y, and Z continue, then look at the likely outcome. And those conditions are political and economic, the things we can influence. But first, the anatomy of the trend. Net migration. We've seen sustained levels of immigration in recent decades, and the composition has changed. That inflow adds steadily to the population base. That's obvious. When more people come from outside than leave, the demographic mix shifts. Combined with difference in fertility and household formation, the change compounds over generations. Now, net migration isn't just one number. It's affected by global events, labour markets, asylum policies, and the decisions of successive governments. So, policy matters. Fertility differences. On average, some groups in the population have higher birth rates than others. Over time, that changes the relative proportions of the population. But, and this is important, those gaps narrow with integration, socio-economic changes, and education. They're not fixed traits. So again, choices and policy can alter the path. Internal migration. People move to cities for work, to suburbs for schools, to coastal towns for retirement. Internal demographic sorting accelerates local change. One town's sudden ethnic diversification can feel rapid and disorienting to locals, even while, nationally, the shift is gradual. And that perception, the lived experience of rapid neighbourhood change, is where a lot of political heat comes from. Rightly or wrongly, people read that as a signal about identity and community. Think about public services. Schools are the obvious example. When local populations change quickly, schools see new language needs, different cultural expectations, and pressure on places. That requires investment in English support, teacher training, and planning for school places. Housing. Different household sizes, demand in particular areas, pressure on social housing stock. All of this produces friction if the supply doesn't adapt. Healthcare, social care, policing. These services are designed for a certain level of demand and a certain local social fabric. Rapid change stresses them, and unless you plan, people notice. Crime and social cohesion. Now, I want to be careful here. Correlation is not causation. Rapid change can increase friction, and friction can increase the risk of disorder, but it's not an automatic line from diversity to crime. The nuanced picture is, places that experience very rapid, unmanaged change sometimes see rises in certain problems, especially where economic opportunity is lacking and community ties are weak. Conversely, well-managed integration and investment turn diversity into economic vitality and cultural enrichment. So let's not pretend it's only one or the other. There are legitimate concerns, and there are bad faith narratives. We need to separate them. Legitimate concerns include the capacity of services, the pace at which communities adapt, and the political and cultural frameworks that help people feel secure. Illegitimate concerns, and this matters, are those that reduce whole populations to caricature, that stoke fear for political gain, or that pretend cultural change is a crime. We have to call that out. Britain is a plural society. It always has been. But the point is governance. How we shape change matters enormously. So, what does good governance look like here? Let's talk policy choices. First, migration controls that are sensible and transparent. By that I mean not knee-jerk bans or blanket hostility, but a clear national framework setting the scale and shape of migration in line with labour market needs, housing capacity, and social cohesion. Think targeted, think temporary worker schemes tied to real skill shortages, and think asylum policies that are effective and humane. It's politically unpopular to be vague on this. People want clarity. Second, integration. And I don't mean vague platitudes about tolerance. I mean active policies. Language training, civic education, accessible routes to work, and local programs that build social bridges. Sports, schools, community projects. Integration is two-way. Host communities must adapt and newcomers must engage. That's a policy problem and a cultural one. Third, family policy and incentives to support domestic birth rates. Countries across Europe have used childcare support, parental leave, and housing policy to encourage higher fertility among the native-born. If policymakers worry about population decline in particular groups, then giving families the support to raise children, affordable childcare, stable work patterns, housing stability, is one sensible lever. And no, it's not a quick fix. Demography moves slowly. Fourth, spatial planning and public investment. If certain towns are absorbing more newcomers than their infrastructure can handle, then central and local government must plan to expand school places, GP services, public transport. That's basic competence. Where you fail to do that, you create resentment, you create stories, you create political backlashes. Fifth, honest public conversation. This is vital. People must be able to talk about identity, culture, and demographic change without being shouted down as racist or dismissed as alarmist. Equally, politicians must not exploit those fears for division. Transparency in data, education about projections, and community-level dialogues ease the tension. You handle this like you handle any major public policy shift, with evidence, with resources, and with respect. Now, let's be clear about the benefits too. Migration has powered our economy in many sectors: healthcare, hospitality, construction, tech. Cultural change brings fresh ideas, entrepreneurship, new cuisines, art. The question isn't whether change is happening, it obviously is. The question is whether it's orderly, managed, and aligned with the country's capacity to integrate newcomers while maintaining cohesion. Balanced policy can preserve the benefits and reduce the strains. We also must guard against two errors. One, the error of repression, shutting down debate or demonizing whole groups because of fears. That's corrosive and wrong. Two, the error of complacency, assuming everything will sort itself out without planning. That's naive and dangerous. Both feed resentment. Both have political costs. So, what's practical in the short to medium term? Start with a cross-departmental demographic strategy. Migration policy tied to housing and skills planning. More funding for English and civic classes. Clearer data at local levels so councils know what planning they need to do. And communication campaigns that explain the choices and trade-offs to the public. That's not glamorous, but it's governance. And look, immigration isn't just numbers. It's people with hopes and needs. Policies that recognize that humanity, while protecting national interests, are not mutually exclusive. We can be compassionate and also clear about the limits of capacity. We can welcome, but also plan. We can integrate and expect integration in return. By the way, there's another angle, encouraging civic participation. New citizens and second-generation kids who feel they belong engage in the democratic process differently. That, over time, reshapes politics, sometimes in surprising ways. The long-term picture of what Britain looks like in 2060 depends not just on who lives here, but on how included they feel in the project of nationhood. Right. I'm not pretending we have all the answers. This is a complex policy terrain, messy and morally fraught. But silence isn't an option. If we don't discuss demographic trends openly, we cede the conversation to the extremes, the shrill alarmists on one hand and the complacent technocrats on the other. Neither serves the public interest. Final point, the long game. Demography is slow, but its effects are enduring. The choices we make now on migration policy, family support, integration funding, and local planning will shape Britain's social and political landscape for decades. So, for those of you listening, parents, council officers, MPs, union reps, business leaders, ask yourselves, what kind of country do we want in 2060? What are we willing to invest in to get there? That's my take for tonight. Next week, we'll close this UK Pulse series with voices from the communities themselves, teachers, GPs, a local council leader, to hear their frontline experiences of these shifts. I want to hear from you as well. Write in, challenge this, tell me where I'm wrong, tell me what I missed. We need this argued in the open, not whispered behind closed doors. Right. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.